I'm greatly concerned because what, an hour, and we'll see how long we can push that. An hour on pruning is just enough time to totally screw it up. All right, I teach, anybody taking the pruning class? All right, yes, I teach a 10-hour pruning class, and that's just 10 hours. And even there, for those who have taken it, just enough to start to tease you, right? So, by far, I think that pruning is the best thing I do. And actually, with the weather, and we can talk about snow and how that does it, I thought I'd maybe put on a more appropriate shirt, right? I'm born and raised in Green Bay, Wisconsin, frozen tundra. Frozen tundra? Yeah, I know.
You lost a few points with me.
Owner, not fan. Owner, not fan. Pulled weeds for Bart Starr when I was 4 and 5 years old. How cool is that? The MVP of Super Bowl, and it's like you're at his house eating his wife's cookies. And you know, with that, here's what gets me too, because I had some people, right, who had like 18, 19 degrees at your house the last week in the cold. Anybody raise your hand? Anybody colder than 18? How cold? What? 6. I know, she's up your way, but that's still above 0. Yeah, Green Bay is, the building code is 5 feet, think of that. 5 feet for water and stuff, because frost goes down that far. So, you know, we'll get into a little, but I just wanted to mention to start with, since it's pruning, and now, you know, see what I did, I said it was okay to snow, and then I guess it took for granted. Too much snow, like that rhododendron out there, see it out the window? Yeah. Even though things might not be broken on that plant right now, what happens as that bank builds up on the edge, and it slushes and freezes and slushes and freezes, it will sit there for what easily could be still more than a week. And that's just going to set that wood down more. So even when it comes back, and it will slowly, so let's say it starts like this, and it goes down, it will slowly come back, but it won't come back, right? Unless you tie it around or something and bring it up. So that's what I've been doing the last several days, is go into things like that, start in a spot, gently wipe it, grab the branches, pull it up, and just every day that I don't have that thing cemented down, right, is another inch or two that it's gonna come back at me. And there's probably going to be some broken branches in there, and that's why then we'll get right into it. Mother Nature, without question, is the worst pruner in the universe. Doesn't care about nothing, where it breaks, where it snaps, twisted, breaks stuff on the way down. So keep that in mind now as we get into this little introduction and you learn different things on cutting, that on branches that are broken, that can actually be a ticking time bomb. For those who took the class, we know what a horn is. There's probably all sorts of horns in there that are slowly rotting away. And that broken branch could actually be the demise of that whole tree in another 4, 5, 6 years. Or not the whole tree, but so much more of it will break down than are what you left with. We're going to go back because I'm being filmed. Oh, no. So with that said, let's get into the appropriate attire. I picked cherries today because you know what, at least with the winter weather we've had, that slowed things down. I was greatly concerned about how nice the weather was here, right? Things were advanced. I was ready to predict, good thing I didn't, I was ready to predict that we were going to have the worst fruit season probably in memory, because we were weeks, if not days, away from different fruit flowering. Did anybody have on their trees a sport flower here or there, anybody? Yeah. It was starting.
I had a rose.
Yeah, roses bloom all the time.
Not when I cut them down in the winter.
Nothing special. So what the snow did, because, you know, again, they would bloom, it wasn't going to hurt, the weather wasn't going to hurt the flower, but the pollinators, what was going to pollinate those flowers? Because the bees and other insects that do that would not have been out this early. Now, with all the cold and the snow, and another couple weeks it's going to take to melt this all away and all around, and the plant to recover from that, we're into March. We're right back into a normal cycle. So in reality, outside the horrible pruning and trees that are down and things, at least the weather that came aligned stuff back up, because I was greatly concerned on places where way back in January 10th or something, we had calla lilies out of the ground like that already. They're not gonna like that this early in the season. So with that, let's talk about pruning quick, and I won't go into all my normal jokes and things, don't have the time. I know. I'll give you my best joke. I was born and raised in Green Bay, Wisconsin, but that's not true. My parents will tell you I'm actually propagated in a 3-inch pot on bench number 4. Continual drip feed irrigation, which accounts for my youth and vigor. And since we're on that, just as a side note, interesting conversations we'd have at the table. I was born and raised at a greenhouse that's 3 acres. It's now 34 in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Both my parents had their master's degrees in floriculture from Cornell. Wow. So we would have all sorts of cool little conversations hanging around the table on many things, right? On many things, but especially plant related. Okay, and with that said, probably pruning isn't the best thing I do. It probably is greenhousing, because greenhouses are so difficult. Propagation and germination and all the different cycles and photoperiodic. However, lots of people do greenhouses. Even though it's far more difficult, lots of people do greenhouses. There's so few people that know how to prune. There are so few people. In fact, I'm here to tell you, you may have seen it. Go to the post office. The worst pruning I've ever seen is done by people who have landscaping on the side of their truck. That you paid to prune your stuff. Now, the good thing, though, is, and then let's lead into that, as we get going and we're done with today, I want you to know that one of the biggest things about pruning is have confidence. If you don't have confidence, don't do it, hire it out. You'll know enough after today to know how to get somebody competent or learn and read more. But have confidence, because if you don't have confidence, you tend to not make the right cuts, you cut too high, etc. And here's the biggest thing. If you prune and do it wrong, nobody's gonna know.
All but all know.
No, they won't. Look around. Your yard won't be any worse than all your neighbors. It won't. Because pruning is done so poorly here. Pruning is done so poorly here. Who's heard of plant amnesty? But plant amnesty, right, was the whole organization to this day now is international, trying to save plants from being butchered, right? Okay, so let's start. I have come up with 7 reasons why to prune. We're going to go through those real quick, and then there's only 2 methods of pruning. By the way, it always amazes me. Do you know there's only 2 cuts in pruning, only 2 types of cuts? So you got a 50-50 chance. How can it be done so wrong? I don't get it. All right, number 1, and this is important, and this can be done at any time of year, dead and dying material, disease material, crossover branches. So any time of year, you can go out and cut that stuff that is dead, that is yellow, that is hanging on rubbing on another branch because that rub may kill them both or cause it to crack. By the way, I look up there, you can go out and cut the broken branches because that's definitely dying off the maple right there out the window. There's no damage. So at any time we want to get dead, dying, disease material out, and the reason why, number 1, is that material is going to be, first of all, the entrance of disease and pestilence for your plant, right? As things die, they are both habitat and food source and breeding grounds for disease, molds, mildews, insects. So by getting that dead, dying material out of there, we call it sound cultural practices. Right away, without using any chemicals, we can already greatly reduce, sometimes more than 90% of the disease on particular plants if you get rid of that material. The second thing, especially on material that's dying, it's still taking energy away. It's dying. Get it out of there. Don't waste the nutrient, the water, the root system on something that's going to be gone. Okay? Now, I want to back up, because actually before I go to even number 1, here it really is the number 1 way to prune. Start before you even prune, at the store. Forgot to get into that. The worst, pruning, most of the time, really bad pruning is because you got the wrong plant in the wrong spot. A 5-foot plant in front of a 3-foot window isn't working. Those prunes are the easiest. It's usually just one at ground level, which isn't true. It's one about a foot or two high. I like to get a chain around it so they can yank it out of there. Yes. But if you've got something in the front window that is constantly being pruned all the time, and by the way, that's going to be heading cuts. You're making this Medusa head. I love to go to people's yards at consultations, and you see that at the window, and I can just do that and fall backwards. And I'm caught on this array of sticks and mob and mess. That comes from heading cuts, right? And my favorite is those trees that are, limbed all the way up as high as the RV goes, and then it's like the umbrella plant. And then better than that one, my really favorite ones are the ones like the heather and the junipers along the sidewalk, where somebody 5 years ago cut it right at the sidewalk. And today, it's every bit as dead as it was 5 years ago, right? And the reason why is when that plant was in that cute little 6-inch pot, and here's my driveway, and I have my little bed. It looked so right for it to be right there. I didn't read the label. 10 feet wide. Well, 10 feet wide, let's see, here's a driveway, I'd like to have a little bit of an inch there. So let's say that's going to be 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet, 4, 5. So that little pot goes way out there. And a lot of people think that looks stupid. Buy bigger plants. Or, really, it works any better than that dead edge sitting there? So many times, I see people buy a tree the size of the flag. And I want it for the corner of the house. And boy, doesn't that look good? Right there, perfect. Didn't read the label. 60 feet wide. So, I need my couple feet around the house to get in there and paint. So let's go for 30 feet. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Way out by you, that tree should be. And if you don't, it's going to be that bastardization where you see it headed off and the Medusa head, and then eventually, after years, you'll rip it out anyway. You've lost all that time. So I cannot stress enough that the best way to prune to start with is to get the right plant from the nursery. Read the label. Forget about how it looks perspective to size. Do two things. Buy a bigger one, or in the case of that, if it's way out there and it's going to take years, what a great place for a delphinium bed and tulips and daffodils. And I think I'll plant some trailing lobelia here for the next couple of years, or some roses. They die in 5 or 6 years anyway, right? And then the junipers will be here, right? Or get it the heck out of there. Something that you are pruning all the time, that if it isn't for restoration, reclamation, pruning, if something you're pruning all the time and creating this mess, throw it away. It really is cheaper than the Bengay and the new pruners and the ibuprofen. It is. All right, got that right plant, right spot, whole different thing. All right, dead dye material, that starts at the nursery. When I bring plants home, before I even plant them, I tend to lay them on the side and roll them around and clean out all that dead material, clean out all the branches, that type of thing, right? So you can clean them out even before it starts. And again, all year long go in there. Nothing will clean out an evergreen better than going into a gnarly evergreen and spending the day cleaning out all that dead wood. You can't believe how you can have a sticky, dark, nasty mess that you clean up like that, and it's just a really nice place. You end up putting a bench and a hosta garden under there. And, all right, number 2, make sure I stay on the right list, is to check growth where space is limited. Number 1 reason most people prune. To check growth where space is limited. Refer back to prefix, because I put it too close to the corner and space is limited. That tree was way out by you, I'd never have to prune it. Not true, I'd center core it and do a few little things, errant branch for the lawnmower. But we prune most stuff, if you think about it, because it gets in the way. Wrong place to start with. Now, at the same time though, let's take like orchards or something. Space is limited to how high I want to climb on the ladder to get my apples, okay? So I'm going to do different pruning for that. Arborways, the space is limited because if I don't make the nice little pruning cut, it won't have that great archway, right? So there are times where we're planting stuff where space is limited, that it's not the wrong plant. By the way, personally speaking, if I was gonna put a hedge in front of a window or some kind of plant, I would find something that's flowering, because first of all, why not? Or have great fall color, right? Why not? And if my window was like 3 feet tall, I'd try to find a plant that grows about 3.5 feet tall. Because as we're gonna learn in a bit, one of the reasons you prune is to increase flower or foliage. So if I'm always pruning it down just a little lower in the window, that will increase bloom. So how cool that during flower time, I'd have this line of flowers that runs along here that I can see wherever I'm sitting. Then, as you know, anybody who's read my column, you've got a deadhead, and you deadhead those off, and that's the pruning, and bang, it's below your window again. Okay, so we do prune when space is limited, both as a reason the plant's in the wrong place and both to do several dimensional or design aspects. We also prune when space is limited, just on general things like even that juniper example that's coming out here, it's still gonna trickle out eventually into the driveway, so you pull up the arms and do little thinning cuts. Number 3, to thin out plants. This is one that most people don't do. This is one of the most important tasks in pruning, to thin out plants. If you look at most of your plants, the middle on evergreens to start with is a very scary place. Ever go into one of those arborvitaes or something and go, leaves, 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 my old glove, 2 Coke cans, there's the basketball, right? It's just a mess in there because it's, especially with evergreens, it's never been cleaned out and thinned out in the middle, so all the needle, all the garbage gets set up in there, and it just starts slowly rotting away. So all you have left is a veneer. And then if something ever happens where a branch breaks or something, just back to that, use the example of the heather or something, evergreens prune really poorly back into wood more than 2 years old. So if I have this whole dead center and all that's living is that very little veneer, anything that damages or breaks it exposes dead wood that's never gonna grow again. Now, there are some exceptions like cryptomeria and things, and we really do like deodoras because they have a great pruning ability. But outside of that, we thin out our evergreens especially and get that material out of there because they'll be a dead center. In cases like the maple there, we would go and thin out and all the little branches inside, you're clipping those away because they're gonna die anyway. The sun isn't getting in there, it's making it dark, the wind isn't moving around. So the air isn't moving around, so we thin out a lot of deciduous trees for the same reason, to keep that middle both aerated and light. And again, back to sound cultural practices. Most diseases, lots of bugs like it damp and dark, and many diseases, especially ones that we don't like the botrytises, the gray molds, do not like moving air. They need stagnant air. If I keep the center of my plants open and thinned out, air moves. And actually, if you look at it and you smoke it, take a smoke bomb and do it, you'll see that a column of air will move through that. As heat rises and it captures that and it has that interior thing and there's heat on the outsides, it will rise up through there. So again, if I'm getting rid of all my dead dying material, if I'm keeping my centers thinned out, then I am going to really lessen the ability of any kind of bug or disease to come in there. And if I'm going organically, and we're not going to get off on this too much, but if I'm going organically, I'm going to have a really good biodiversity, so as soon as the bad bug comes in, a good bug comes in to eat it up. That's how it works, right? Okay, next one is let's see, to thin out plants. And by the way, thinning out plants should be the thing that you should be doing a lot of. We're going to talk about it in a moment, but when you do heading cuts, that begets thinning. All heading cuts have to eventually go on and be treated by thinning. We're going to talk about what that is in a moment. Here's one that most people aren't too much aware of, to encourage root growth. We do lots of things to encourage root growth in pruning. First of all, probably all of you know this. I buy a little plant from the store in a pot, I pull that juniper out that we talked about, the roots are just tight in that thing, what do? I think I was gonna talk today. Most of my friends say I'm a masochistic gardener. Masochistic gardener. Other people's flowers, it's so easy. You know, I take the thing out, you're being all nice, I just take this thing, I like the end of that, and yeah! Actually, what I usually do is I'll put that pot, even if it's a 5-gallon pot or a 20-gallon pot, we'll lay it on its side, let's stick with that little 1-gallon pot, and with a shovel, whack, we'll just cut the bottom inch off. And if you cut that bottom inch off, there's almost no root on the bottom, it's just on the edges, it's just the roots have gone into there. Then we'll take this and just rough it on the side, just, you know, go up and down the edges, clipping that away, because it's pruning, and it's heading cuts that we're gonna learn. Heading cuts make that, Medusa's head, okay? So rather than this tangled tight mess, that's how we do it out of that pot, because otherwise it's all tangled together and will grow. By untangling it, especially by cutting it, we are promoting root growth. Now the next thing that we do that I want to point out, that you do to promote root growth is you actually prune on top to encourage roots below. Who's bought fruit trees this year or last year? Anybody buy fruit trees this year or last year? Everybody else has fruit trees? Fruit grows here like crazy, right? So, who has clematises and different kind of vine plants? Anybody buy one of those in the last couple of years? Okay, so on all of that material, let's start with the fruit trees. Especially the very first year, you want to come through and do two things. Cut like 1/3 of the plants away. And then you want to remove all fruit, especially the flowers. If you're really good, as soon as the flowers, if you want to see the little flowers on them, but take your scissors and cut them off. Do that again the second year. Remove the fruit. The reason why is the plant wants to reproduce and it's struggling with growing enough root system to bring enough moisture in for all those apples, pears, cherries, etc. I guarantee you that if you buy a fruit tree this year, and I do too, and for 2 years I take all the fruit off, and for 2 years you leave all your fruit on the 3rd year, I'll have more fruit than you did all 3 years combined, first, second, and 3rd year, because it's a root system, and it will take your plant a long time to catch up. So one of the things we do, back to clematises, let's say, if I buy that clematis and plant it in the ground, and you know, they're expensive, they're $19.95 for this little stick, literally a little stick with a leaf or two, and it came out and has like 5 flowers. Out it is. That year, I then prune it back way down to like there, a foot or 2 tall. Same thing. It will be very spindly. Imagine the root system that things like that need to grow, right? So if that first year and second year I really prune them back, then the root system is growing, you let it release, and now the root system is ahead of the plant itself, and it's been driven to, oh, you haven't let me produce, I must reproduce, and away you go. The last thing that we do, so we're root pruning indirectly, right, on certain plants, or pruning on top to encourage root growth. The last one, and a very nice trick that's not really known well, on things like wisteria, lilacs, old apples, lots of old magnolias, lots of big old flowering plants, which by the way, all fruit trees are flowering, right? If they're growing well, but they're just not producing bloom and fruit, which is common, if I root prune, I go in with a trench shovel, everybody know what that is? It's a long, narrow shovel. Buy the one that has the pads on the top, because if you don't, what I'm going to tell you to do, your foot is going to ache for days. And then with that trench shovel, go right out to the drip line, right where the foliage comes, and you put that shovel down as deep as you can. Hire an 18-year-old. Because you're going to go all the way around the plant. That thing is only that wide. You're going to pull it up, you're only going to move over 3 inches, making sure you overlap and down in the hole. Then you're going to only move 3 inches. And by making that line down at least a foot, which is where most of the feeder roots are, you've now done a heading cut on all the roots, right at the number one spot where the roots are, right at the feeder roots, right at the drip line. This will cause a massive explosion of Medusa head, new roots. New roots, all that new water, all that new nutrient. Nature always responds to boom and bust. And this is a boom. We're gonna have more apples than you ever saw forever, right? So root pruning to rejuvenate old material, literally by sending a shovel down at least a foot in a non-broken line, not perforated. A continuous line prunes those roots up.
Why not perforated?
Because perforated, you're missing the roots between the gaps.
Yeah, but you'd still get growth there.
Yeah, but I'm trying to fire this thing up.
I'm trying not to work so hard.
Yeah. What's wrong with the plant the way it is?
Okay, get
Yeah,
your
see?
18-year-old.
And number one garden tool on the peninsula, I think, is a machete. Number two, actually, a good pruner. Number two is a young back between 18 and 20. Grandchildren work, get them to come up. They work for pizza and Red Ball. It's great. So, and just as a side joke too, lots of times I think it's a job like that, even if you just want to go out and do it, I'm fortunate at 60 that I can do this stuff, that for 5 days in a row I can hand shovel my driveway. That's because I have muscle memory. Every day I'm digging and cutting and moving. I have seen 18-year-old even, and one day working with me, they don't come back the second day, they're already puppies. So what I'm trying to say, in certain jobs, especially at our age, if you're not familiar with work, even just moving mulch, I'll tell people. I've seen all sorts of clients I know, they got mulch and they were gonna do it themselves and they were goofed up for a week. Because they're just not used to that motion all day long. So cheaper than Bengay, cheaper than Advil, cheaper than all the hot water combined as an 18-year-old and some pizza, I can tell you, particular jobs like this. And the last thing I quickly want to get to is when you dig stuff up too, or like let's say when I buy a plant, bare root plant, the roses right now you can get, I'll go through and I'll trim off, I'll head off those roots too, or when I dig up something to transplant, I'll look at it, we're gonna learn in just a moment how to prune correctly, and I'll do heading cuts on those rather than horns, because it's the same thing. If I'm transplanting material and I can ever see the roots, I'm gonna do some stuff to head it, because why not get roots to come at me more? And by the way, since we're on root production, bone meal is a miracle drug of root production. I always had bone meal with me. Every time I plant anything at any time, it goes in the bottom of the hole, it gets worked up in the bottom of the hole, and then I put it on top, because by the time the stuff on the bottom of the hole, where the roots are and stuff, is used up and leached away, the stuff on the top is working its way down. Bone meal, miracle drug of root production. Now comes my favorite. The thing that you should be doing, and by the way, these numbers work together. Many times when you prune, you're doing 1 and 4 and 6 or whatever. The next one is my favorite, and it demarks if you are pruning or not. To intelligently alter the shape of the plant. Notice the word intelligence. If this is my driveway right here, and I come along with a chainsaw or a hedgers and go, yeah, because that's the driveway, that's not intelligent. Was there any consideration, but think about that, I don't get that. People just cut, why do you cut there? Well, it was in the way of the thing. No thought about the plant, right? It was a thought about a line, no thought about the plant. The real simple difference between plant butchery and pruning is, when you're pruning, every time you make a cut, no matter what you are doing, undercut first, then down we go. Every time you're making a cut, it's for an absolute reason on that plant. If you're pruning something, and at the 312th time of you doing this, I go, stop, right there. Why did you make that cut? How much is growth going to be this year and next year? What direction is it going to go? You have to answer that question. Every cut that you do has a predictable response, not only to where, but how fast, over what duration of time. When you're pruning correctly, pruning is wonderful because it gets easier. Because the plant's going where you want it to go. You are intelligently altering the shape of the plant for what you want it to do. That's dangerous. These things will cut you down. So with that said, remember, and it's kind of one of the tenets. If you can look at a plant, you're going to prune. And if you can't look at it and say, where do I want that to be this year? What do I want it to exactly look like? And okay, not exactly, 95%. What do I want the 95% look like 5 years from now? If you can't see the plant this season, next season, 5 years from now, you can't prune. You can't prune. Hire it out. No offense. Some people can't work in that future 3D thing. But that's what the difference between plant butchery is. You control it. Every cut you make is predictable. And if you don't see that and don't know what you're trying to do, then you're just out there hacking away, right? Because you have no idea. For homework, right, this isn't a class, but for homework, if you want to see my favorite pruning movie for intelligently altering plants, best pruning movie ever made, Edward Scissorhands, right? Anybody know that movie? It's one of Edgar Allan or Vincent Price's last movies, right? It's for those who haven't seen it, it's with Johnny Depp, right? When he was really young, and his hands are pruners, and he does his topiary stuff, and like, oh. By the way, one of the best pruning I ever saw, I was in Europe. We were at a very nice estates, and here was this. And we like English boxwood because of how easy it prunes. You can hedge it, you can head it, you can do whatever you want. It's really tight, it works really well. And here in a full hedge, in life size, coming up over the hedge in hunt. Anybody have horses? Hunt is a different style of saddle and presentation. In hunt, because they're hunting, is a rider and his helmet, everything coming up on the horse, and the horse is up. In front of it, which is way too cool, are two dogs with their ears who have come down, and it's all made out of boxwood. It's like 300 years old. Yes! Cool. So anything you're doing, we're intelligently altering it, and the reason that we can make those things is because, like I said, every cut I make on any plant, I can tell you next week, next month, next year, next decade, what is going to be the exact response of my cut there. Makes it so easy. All right, now, once we get these other things done, here's where pruning becomes fun. What you want to do is get to a point where your plants are now going where they want to go, so you can spend the time to encourage fruit production, flower production, foliage production. Isn't that what we got plants for? To look pretty, to eat them, to harvest them, to take photos of them. So, in the case of fruit trees is all about, if you're doing fruit trees right, who has orchards? Anybody really into it? Then you'll know, if you've done orchards right, you have pruned it to make so many fruit spurs that the plant would be so heavy that it would break under the weight of the fruit, that I have to cut the fruit spurs and then later on even prune fruit away. Do you know that? Even prune fruit away. If you're really into orchards, lots of times you'll prune fruit away because you pruned it so well to encourage so much new fruit and flower. And you do that especially on orchards because fruit spurs as a whole are most productive from their 3rd to 5th year out. So things after 5 years start to get less productive. So I always want pruning to have new 1 and 2 years coming in to replace the 5-year ones that I'm pruning out. Just like who has raspberries and different cane plants, right? You're pruning out the older ones to encourage the new ones to come in. Who has roses? Roses is all about heading cuts on the right node to encourage that shape for more flowers, right? It's all about pinching, deadheading. The simple thing, and I'll put a rhododendron right up the window there. What are we supposed to do with rhododendrons and lilacs when they're done blooming? Yeah, because if you don't, that calluses off the bud eye, the secondary buds bloom, not the primary. So there, and by the way, deadheading is a form of pruning, pinching. So we're doing that to make sure that I get better quality flowers and more flowers. So it really is the name of the game. Anybody have the spirea, what is it, gold flame, that really nice yellowy one with beautiful little spirea. Anybody have cotoneas? Anybody have potentillas? Yes. Now those, first of all, beginning of the year, right about now, you prune them down to about that tall off the ground. We just encountered some at 2 different houses that were like this tall. Now they're that tall. I love it. That's number 7. What will happen is they'll grow up, and right about here they'll start to bloom. And if I do nothing, they'll sometimes sport out again in the fall. But if I prune them down to here, then they'll bloom again. And then if I prune them down to here, they'll bloom a 3rd time, and depending on the location, I can get them to bloom sometimes 4 times. So spireas, potentillas, I can get to bloom minimally 3, if not 4 times, by doing these heading cuts right at the time that they're in their end bloom stage to re-bloom them again. Who wouldn't want them to bloom 3 or 4 times? Now, as a trick that everybody should be doing, same thing. Anybody have delphinium, lupin, columbine? Okay, let's see by hands. Who has all these kind of plants? You should. You just moved here. Who's been to Butchart Gardens? Who hasn't? You just moved here too. Butchart Gardens has a famous photo, right? It's their iconic thing in their gift shop. It's on their playing cards and screensavers and teacups. It's everything. It's Delphinium and the Roses, right? Have you seen that? It's their iconic shots. When is that shot taken? You would think. So, when your delphiniums bloom, you would think. No, well, was it summer? Maybe, because it probably was like September 15th, I think they told me. And fall doesn't start till September 20th. So that's a September shot. I'm going to say that again. That's a September shot. Here is something everybody should be doing, because there's only 5 places in the world that we can do this with, right? If you're not doing this, move away. You're taking valuable real estate. Get somebody else. Think about that. Only 5 places us gardeners can do this with. Delphinium, lupin, columbine, rock crest, all sorts of things. Calendula, or campanula. If you go in, daisies, if you go in right when that bloom is just ready to give it up, this is the note, not when it's brown. When I go in and can still see the pigment, that was light blue. Oh, that one was purple. Those were pink. If you get it right at the end of bloom and take that delphinium that's like that big around in foliage, right, heads up here, and you reduce it to a thing about that big, you take away every leaf that's more than 1/4 in size, you cut those stalks down to the ground and let it sit, in about 2 days all those little leaves that are down there brown up, and you call me really angry. I tell you to just chill out. Then what happens is, our weather here is like spring. Remember, we don't get warm nights. You know, it's 70 the day and 50, 60 at night. That's May and June in most places. That plant, and because the sun is out, and what's the number 1 reason why things are alive? All living things must? Yes, and you just cut off all the flowers. You committed flower genocide. So the plants respond with that massive root system, and wonderful weather is, you cut off my 20 flowers, I'll show you I'll make 40. And that's the response, because by the way, those are heading cuts. So you prune to increase flower. Think of that. The iconic garden in all of North America, their iconic shot is a June flowering plant in September because they prune to increase flowers, and we get away with it because of the weather. So there's a variety of ways that you should be getting not cutting out stuff out of your driveway. Remember we talked about that, that's being pulled away. We want to free up your time not to always be pruning the wrong material in the wrong spot. We want to have the right stuff there so you can be doing the nuances to get all these new flowers. And then finally, the last one is rejuvenation or reclamation pruning. It's my favorite because of the reaction you get. It makes a great before and after shot. And I have to tell people to start with two. Many times on reclamation pruning, not rejuvenation, reclamation pruning, it's really, we're deciding, hey, it's gonna be the excavator or the shovel anyway, so what do we have to lose? Right, what do we have to lose? Examples of that would be a rhododendron that's as large as a ceiling. Kind of yellow on top, basically sparse leaves. Once I go down an inch or two, nothing in the middle. Not true, down here at the bottom, there's one or two little sport branches. Anybody got that rhododendron? Yeah, very common. That plant there comes down to about here someplace. Cool. It'll take 3 to 5 years to come back, and 3 to 5 years it'll be the best rhododendron you have. By the way, many times on plants like that, let's say it'd be like that one out there, that one wouldn't necessarily take it, but let's say it's close to a window or a front door. We will prune it down like that, but because of its location, in a prime area, the front of the house or doorway, we'll dig it up, transplant it to another area, and bring in another one. Not because, it's gonna die or anything, because it's gonna take 5 years to look good and it's in a prime spot. And by the way, in 5 years, dang, I wish I had it back here, because it's the best rhododendron I have. What would be other things? Lilacs that are 30 feet tall, 20 feet tall. No, first of all, the bottom has like 139 suckers. Then there's no leaves whatsoever. Then the next zone is these big heart-shaped leaves that I wish were not there because they're kind of brown and crinkled and yellow and look horrible all season long. And then way up on top where I can't even pick the flowers or basically smell them is foliage and flowers. That plant is easy to rejuvenate, reclaim. You cut it all down to ground level, peasant ground level. We usually put fabric around because, then we hack out all those suckers that are down there, put fabric around because they're gonna bubble up, leave a hole about that big, and the 29 that become 89 suckers that try to shoot up to there, we start thinning out to like 10 or 12, and we get 10 or 12 nice little canes coming up, so now the plant's about as big as this room, and then every year we go in and pull out 4 or 5 of the bigger stems. Out of the 39 suckers coming up, we trim it down to 4 or 5 to replace those coming up, right? And we continue to do it that way. The other way, then, there is rejuvenation. That was that prune I told you about, potentilis. Potentilis, every year, man, we take them down to ground level. And clematis, pretty much, in climbing roses, a climbing rose that's twice as tall as this ceiling, every year, right about now, it'll come down to about 3 or 4 feet, depending on where it is. I know, think about this. Who has climbing roses or clematis? Let's see, without even seeing it, I can describe it. What was that Johnny Carson thing, right? Give me my hat. Okay. It's a thing that comes up, and again, as long as it's a few years old, it comes up and there's really no foliage and it's just down there. Then the next line of foliage is just garbage, right? Especially on roses and stuff. It's so black spot and dead and horrible, and all that does is expose all this blistered cane. Then as it grows up and starts to branch out, it becomes this ball, knotted, twiny thing that comes over that I couldn't prune if I wanted to, because what is dead and alive and how much is in there. And by the way, I want them that are so old that the first thing I do when I come up to look at it is I try to find out how old the cedar trellis is, because I'm worried if I touch it at all, this thing will come down. Local horticulturist, crushed under clematis. Bleeds to death. So those all come down. Now, both those plants I just described, clematis and roses, that will be 20 feet tall, if they're established, right? Because to get that tall in that kind of matted system, they're established. Both of those will be 20 feet tall at the end of this year. But rather than this dead, half-dead, bolly, matty flowers tangled in there, it's going to be this lush thing just growing like flowers like crazy. And rather than hanging out this way, I've got it going along the trellis just to the way that I want to intelligently alter its shape to make it look so cool there. And then after all that's done, next year about this time, repeats. Yes.
And you don't have to root prune those.
No, especially if you do that way, you keep them up. So dogwoods are a common plant that gets out of hand. Who has dogwood? I've slayed so many dogwoods in my lifetime. Dogwoods we love, they're easy. Plant that, a dogwood plant can get as big as this, a single one, right? Nothing for a dogwood plant to get this big, and it's not a plant anymore, right? The branches go down and they root up and they start coming up, and it becomes this like 89, it's what Gulliver's Travels. You couldn't get this thing out if you want because it's this giant's tied down massively all around in the ground. Let's see. Right there. Oh, I know. So dogwoods are a thing that you can definitely take down to ground level. And not ground level, but you want to leave about 4 or 5 inches. It will rejuvenate faster. If I do that, leave 4 or 5 inches, all the little nodes off of that, it will sucker out of, or not sucker out, or branch out of. Then I'll have a plant that will grow about this tall, and then every year I thin that back down. And then rather than having this horrible overrun system, which by the way, dogwood, yellow, and red twig, which is gorgeous, if you see them after a couple of years, they get all blistered, you don't get that good color. The good color is only on the last few inches of the tip. If I prune them like that, it will constantly be, boy, I did a lot of snow shots. It will constantly be a beautiful spire of red or yellow twig. I am looking for one that we just butchered. Now see, I've been told, man, don't use the term butchered, that we intelligently designed here we go, with a chainsaw.
Andrew, what about honeysuckle? Same way?
Yes. So there's before and after, same spot.
Are you talking about red osier dogwood or?
I'm not talking about the flower ones, I'm talking about the colored twig. Yeah, yellow twig, red twig, but you can see there's rejuvenation pruning. People, oops.
That's all a lot, no.
Well, okay. I'm glad I did it, right?
That to that.
That to that, that's the same spot. Same spot. Now remember, the amazing thing is, first of all, people pay you money to do that. They actually let you come back to their property and do it again. But look at how just tangled up there. Look at how that heading cuts made this amazing hedge work on there. It was years and years of heading the plant off. So what happened is, you have this just nasty, look at the tops of the ones before they're pruned. There was much brown, the yellow, and the red is barely showing.
It was there, it's short.
Yes. Oh my. But that's right, easier actually.
It is.
There's not a lot of decision there. It's like 3 or 4 inches from the ground. Not true though. The thing that took the longest on this pruning, was to go to all those side branches that have adhered down and dug them out and got back to what's just the core, just the main central plant. We don't know if Linda wants to be reminded of what happened to her yard. Oh wow, Linda's plants, right? Okay, so rejuvenation, reclamation, pruning is done 2 ways. Number 1, to go into plants that are just out of control and say, what the heck? What can be worse than this, right? I mean, the dogwoods, you saw how round they were and sticky and just horrible. Even if I killed them, all you're gonna do is say thank you, right? And it will bring them back, be one of the best plants. Because again, remember, the massive root system, just like that delphinium we were talking about, that massive root system that's sitting there doing that whole plant now only has to do that size of plant. Up it comes like crazy by a machete.
Hibiscus, is there any special thing about that?
Yes, and again, and that's the perennial annual one, or do you have a woody hardy one, or the?
Gosh,
See.
I'm in the gardening club trying to learn.
Oh, okay. So there's 2 kinds. Generally, the woody ones are marginal here. There is a
I get lots of flowers on it.
Yeah.
And it has been pruned, but I don't know if it's done right, but I have been getting lots of flowers on it every year.
It's woody.
Yeah,
It
it's
is
woody.
kind of woody.
Yeah, okay, and again, we live here in the banana belt, right? I mean, we get away with a lot of plants. So
Yeah, everybody tells me.
because that's marginal, that would probably not do well at my house at 994 feet, so.
I've been here about 4 years and it's bloomed every year.
So afterwards, we'll talk. All right, so now, got that, that's the 7 reasons to prune. You can do them all the time. The next thing I want to do now is what really is going to make the talk work. Because like I said, what really gets me is there's only 2 types of prunes. So how can you move it up? The first prune is a heading prune. That is where it's called headed off. That's where you go someplace where there's a node and you cut it, and see how I'm cutting it right on that node within like 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch. That is so important.
Does the angle matter?
Yes. So for example, if I was cutting this, I would cut that way. See how the pruner is mimicking the thing? I would take it and cut it this way. I would take it and cut it this way, not across. So a heading cut is right above a node. Now a node can either be a place where there's bud, or see the little plant scar there? And again, the filmer's not gonna like this. That's a node too, right? It doesn't have to be a thing. Most nodes will display themselves as a weird little shape, a scar, a line, a ball. In the case of the rhododendron, a little pencil point. But it doesn't have to be where there's a branch or a node. It can be, or it doesn't have to be where there's a branch or a leaf. It can simply be where the node is. So that in itself. Because the reason why every node has a couple things going for it. First of all, it's packed. The reason they bulge out, if you can see it, there's a slight bulge there. You can always tell a node because it's a slight bulge. It has a whole chemical pack in there. It has 2 different things in there. The first thing it does, and the most important, is when I cut on a node, I release all sorts of chemicals that are antifungal and seal off the cuts. Seal off the cut. But the next thing, then, is there's also growth hormones in there. And by cutting that close, they activate new growth, because this is why, generally speaking, the reason you're doing a heading cut is to make growth where growth didn't really exist or accelerate before. If I have this top here and I do a heading cut here, that is going to turn into this in another year or 2. The problem is if I do it there and there and there and just head off like we're saying we do for a hedge, if I just start coming across and going bang, 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 I get this here, and 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 I get this here. And then if I clip all those off on top of all that, I get that, and that, and that, and that, and that, right? So heading cuts, the important thing to remember is a heading cut makes growth, accelerated growth, primary growth, where it didn't exist before. And we have what's called a break ratio. Actually, in pruning terms, it's called the Hydra effect. You know, from Greek mythology, I cut the serpent off and it makes 2 heads. However, I really get down on my fellow horticulturists, that's absolutely wrong. I have called it the Medusa head. Hydra only splits 2, 4, 8. Plants have a break ratio of what I cut to how many breaks. For example, like a potentilla, if I clip that thing, the reason it works so good down well, the break ratio is 12 plus. For every cut, 12 new ones come up. Who has mountain laurel? You ever cut that and how it just comes back faster? That's because it has a break ratio of 7 plus. Yeah, and if you head it off. So it's more than a hydra. It's like, cut me once, I make 3. Cut those 3, 9, 27, 81, 243, I'll quit from there. It just keeps going on and on and on. But heading cuts are so wonderful. Again, roses, dahlias, anything that blooms, fruit, I want the new growth. The most important thing on a heading cut is not to leave a horn. That's the only
Would you
thing.
define horn?
Yes, I am right now. If I cut here, plants are stupid. You can cut an arm off of it, it has no idea. No central nervous system. It's all connected, you know, that's why the nodes are so important. There's no interconnecting system. So if I do this, plant doesn't even know I cut a finger off. And because I'm not down next to the node, nothing is stimulated here, especially to start to antifungally callus the cut off. Think of it as like, you know, our coagulating of our blood. It has that same function. So what happens is this horn starts to die. And when it gets to here, there's no mechanical stimulant to release that antifungal package, right? So it just starts rotting down. If you have roses, you see that black streak all the time. If you have fruit trees, or you go look around fruit trees that have limbs broken, most of the time you'll see that somewhere there was a cut and they left a horn. It was a big branch and they left like that much off of it. A horn. And that starts rotting right into the heartwood and down comes the branch. Why I said in the beginning of this talk, if I don't go out, if I just do nothing but trim away a broken branch, and if it's left a horn, that's what I was referencing, that could be the demise of that tree in several years. So, horn, 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 getting close, that's probably close enough. Not a good cut, that's a horn. There we go.
Okay.
So do not leave a horn, right? That's why when you do these chainsaw butchery, right, the hedging shears, across my window, across my driveway, all I'm doing is leaving horns, right? Because there's no determination whatsoever. It's just level cut all the way through. Now, the next thing, the most important thing to remember on a heading cut as well is 90%, and almost all plants it's over 70, and most plants, 90% of accelerated growth will occur at the last node in that direction. Remember how I said every cut has a reason? If I cut this plant here, accelerated growth will occur, although these guys will grow too. Accelerated growth, the majority growth will occur on this branch out this way. Okay, so if this is my house, lots of times, right? And people come around and they just want to get it out of the thing and they go cut, cut,
That's where it goes.
cut, cut. Did that nice straight line. What I just did is this one, and that one, and that one, and that one left are all right back to the house. All the time I get, Andrew, you know, it seems I'm pruning my driveway, I prune out my sidewalk, and it just seems like it grows back in faster. It's because it does! Got it? If I do a heading cut out of my driveway or walkway and leave it going back up into the window, out in the driveway, it will grow back faster than it would if you would have left it alone. So if this is my house, here's what I would do. On the house, look at how if I did, we'll move into thinning cuts, we'll talk about that in a moment. If I did that, I would take all the stuff away, pointing that way. It wouldn't look bare, it would still look nice to everybody else, right? It wouldn't be a stripped away thing, but I eliminated growth going to the house. I don't really have to come back here and prune, that's not true. There'll be one or two that will come back. When I go alongside of people's houses, a house like this might take me 4 or 5 hours to go around. The next time it might take me an hour, The next time it might take me a half an hour. Why? Because we talked about it. I am telling the plant what to do. I visualize where I want it to go. I don't want it going into the house. Because the next cut, so got it, no horns. I just want to make sure, no horns, no horns, no horns. I want you to understand that the accelerated growth is the direction that you leave it, exactly the direction. So in the case of fruit trees, that's how we make them do these lovely curves. If I cut it here, it's going that way. This node, even though there's no branches, going this way. This one's going this way, this one's going this way, that one's going that way, that one's going that way, that one's going that way, this one that way. I control where it goes. All you have to be doing is watching rather than clipping. The next cut is a thinning cut. By the way, most people in America, most landscape companies do heading cuts. About 80-20, 80% heading cuts, 20% thinning.
Before you move on, water shoots on
Yes.
apple trees, etc.
Get that
Is there
off.
any way to retard them?
Yes! Hold that thought a second, right? I'm gonna go through that and that will be first question. And how much time can I literally take, because we're at 11:32?
Vina, you wanna let him go? Okay, all right, everybody
Yeah,
happy?
because this is it, pruning is the worst thing done, right? Thinning cuts should be about 80% of your pruning. We exactly reverse it around. Even people that get hired to do it come through and they shear off the plant, like I said, and they just walk down the house and go wham, 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 and come right across the driveway and go. Blah, 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 blah. My favorite one, did you see on you see it all the time on Discovery Trail, all the evergreens are out. So about, 3-4 feet off the plant, they cut it right at the edge, and now there's just all these dead things that sit here too, right? Because by the way, heading cuts on evergreens, on conifers, heading cuts on conifers in wood more than about 18 months old is dead plant walking. So you see, you come to a pine like this and I go, oh, I got these guys, and I'll cut it right there, and it looks green. And next year it's a little brown, and next year it's all brown, and the following year it's that, right? If you cut into evergreen wood, it doesn't, heading cuts, they don't respond that way. They only respond out here on the tips, on what we call lateral growth, 18-month-old growth or less, lateral. Lateral growth is where evergreens do really well. That's how you make Christmas trees. Right, and you've seen the chart, you can get anybody ever get the permit to go in the woods? I've done that with my kids, pretty cool. Hard to find a good tree, right? Yeah. Now, it's even worse to me when I go and try to find a good tree because they've cutted it so much, it's made so many Medusa branches, I can't even hang ornaments on them, right? The plant's so thick, they just kind of hang on the edge of the plant, right. That's where Lazy J, shameless plug for them, I love those folks. Lazy J Tree Farm, they do shear but only once or twice. So you've actually got a plant that's thick enough that looks good, but not so thick like commercial Christmas trees that literally the balls can't hang down, there's so many branches, or that way. Okay, thinning cuts, the advantage of a thinning cut is it stops growth where it's being made. A thinning cut is a cut made at the point where one branch radiates from another. Thinning cuts. Horn. Thinning cuts. Thinning cuts. Thinning cuts. Thinning cut. It really gets fun when you get in little maples and stuff, because how you get them untangled? Thinning cuts. Thinning cuts. Thinning cut. Especially on a maple. Who's done that? I'll just do this. There goes that Medusa head thing, right? So it's really thinning cuts that you're doing on fruit trees, on maples, on all sorts of stuff to aerate it out, like in there. See, I would come in there, if this was a little maple, all those leaves are gonna get tangled up. Japanese maples, to me, are genetically derived from cousin it. Anybody know from Adam's Family, cousin it, this thing that, who has a maple tree or a weeping cherry or whatever, that it is. It's just a cousin in. It's just this thing that's so grown on itself and on itself. It has no shape, no nothing. It's on the ground. It's out 3 or 4 feet. And if you try to go and cut that, you can't, because now the live and the dead are so intertwined. Where it's usually this once or twice a year you're going through and just slowly thinning it out, because those kind of plants want to be light, loose, and airy, right? You've seen other Japanese paintings. You want the light, it's called dappled light. You want the light to dapple through with shade and sun. You want the leaf to flutter, which gives it great action there. That's derived from thinning cut. So, really pretty simple. Thinning cut at the point of origin. A thinning cut stimulates what was on the ends of what was that branch out. So, if I thin cut here, all the energy from that little cut, because every piece, no matter how tiny, every piece has an exact branch, it has an exact piece of root in the ground that's feeding that. You know that? Every piece of plant. That's why if you would, I don't know if you've ever poured gasoline or something, or something poison, you'll see a dead spot. Lots of times we can figure that out. Did you spill fertilizer on? Yeah, we did. Okay. Because if you kill it a root system, it will manifest itself at the exact point where it is. If I prune it away, what the plant will do is it will re-plug in, old-fashioned switchboards, right? It will take my capacity from this branch and plug it into there. And that makes sense because flower production occurs at the tips of plants, right? And flower production means seed, is reproduction. So the plant has evolved to, as I lose branches along my stem, we throw all that capacity to the tips to grow new flowers. That's why fruit trees, if you look at it, really a veneer, right? Anybody doing an orchard really well, there's nothing in the inside. It's all out on the edge, because I want all energy to go out to the edge to make that apple. Also, anything inside, how are my pears and anything else ripening if I've got all that light underneath them? So got it? It's so simple. It's heading cuts, it's thinning cuts. Heading cuts are what dooms most people because of Medusa head. That I cut again, and each Medusa head gets a Medusa head, right? And each Medusa head gets a Medusa head, or then what happens, because they're all horns, like I said, go out and look at your hedges and things, you'll see in front of your windows, or I just keep shearing it at a spot, and it does become as much alive as dead. The plant doesn't have any free form. That was back to that picture of the dogwood. If you saw it, it's just all this intertwined little ball. There was some stuff when we cut like that, it's great. You just come down. We had some potentillas with a chainsaw. Yeah. Take the pitchfork. It just comes up as one big tumbleweed, right? Because it's just so intertwined. All right, any questions on pruning?
In December, we moved a lilac. So
Okay.
did I hear you right, and when you said you could whack it down, or?
Yes, but again, I'm not saying heading cuts, and I am, but I'm saying a heading cut at like ground level. Because to cut it, a heading cut up here is going to make this weird, we've all seen these trees, this weird thing that, Medusa head on a stick. Right. So, heading cuts are what dooms. Let's go this way. First of all, never head off an evergreen unless you want to permanently turn it into something that was never meant to be, right? Because an evergreen, once it's headed off, will never be the plant that it was ever going to be. Numerous tips will compete for itself, and if you cut those off, and all the way that wood is, those are all what we call really weak crotches, so they'll just start splitting down. Don't do that. Revert back to the prefix of this talk. Don't put a 30-foot tree in front of a 12-foot view. Put a 10-foot tree in front of a 12-foot view. So, yeah, be careful on heading. No, you did not hear me say head that thing off. What I said is it's massive. You can take it down to the ground, because what we're trying to do is kill off the main canes, so the sucker shoots come up, and believe me, invasion of the garden century. and you're trimming those down to a, you know, a manageable little bunch. As far as water sprouts go, good question. Here is a trick that will make this whole lecture worthwhile. Fruit trees all the time get water sprouts, right? Those little shoots that come up. And if you let them go, by the end of the season, they'll be that tall on apples and that tall on peaches and that big on pears, etc. If you start looking in another month, they're going to appear and they're going to come out like a new rose growth. They're going to be this reddish purplish color, right? And there's about a week to 10 days where if I just go in with my glove in hand and do this, they'll just rub away. The hundreds of them. I barely have to push. I just go la da da. I have other songs I sing. Actually, usually it's really sad with me. I'm listening to NPR or World Deutsche Welle or BBC America or something like that. But if I wipe them out, I could go into a tree this big and spend 10 minutes and just that fast and have the 427 gone. If I wait 2 weeks, then even if I rub them out, the leaves will fall, but these little guys will be here. That will actually be a pinch, and each one of those will send out 2 or 3 because you screwed up the tip. You headed it off. So then what I got to do is come in with this. Now, when they're that small, I don't pay attention to it, and I don't, so I wait till the end of the year, or now when they're that long. But think, this time of year doing that to 400 and whatever, or even 2 weeks later doing this 400 times, I can then spend an hour on a tree. So to be monitoring your fruit trees, to see when that first initial water sprouts come out and wipe them away, and then you go out there about every month, because in a ratio, let's say, the first shot it's 100% of what's coming out. But then the next time it will be like 23%, then it will be 12%. Then it will be 6. All season long, they're going to want to throw out a few more, but that main rush is going to come just as the buds are opening, the flowers are coming out, and they just wipe off. It's the best trick I got. It cost me more money than anything else. If I would just let it go, every 10 minutes that I wipe it off, somebody would pay me an hour to prune them out later on. Other questions on pruning?
Okay, on that same water sprout,
Right.
over time, if you keep rubbing those little things off, does it eventually cause those sprouting nodes to diminish?
Yes, yeah.
So you have to do
But,
less.
so, yes and no. It causes those individual areas to diminish, but it kind of, overall, though there's not very much change on the plant, it's the nature of the plant to do that.
Because I have an old apple tree that when I bought my property, it had water shoots 20 feet high.
Yeah, taller than the tree itself.
Taller than the tree. And so we cut them all off down to the branch, and the main structure of the tree, the original laterals had been headed off, so there was very little growth beyond that. And what I ended up doing was leaving a few of those water shoots and creating.
Okay, you're right, and you could.
Creating a new shape to
Right, and when we do that, we leave them real short. We cut, and I just did this at a client, we've been working on the tree for 3 years, same thing. So, we cut, let's say it was things this big, we cut them short, so it was like, to this on the plant, maybe even shorter, more like that, and then cut it on that node direction that was already, going down slightly. Right? So really important, we didn't leave long things, because that's gonna be this weird, and that's gonna put a weird stress on this. In reality, if I could get away with it, depending on where the node was, make these things, be bigger, we would have done something, like that, a real short thing, as short as I could possibly get with the right direction.
And then eventually those had grown.
Right, and then, even though these are flower buds, then as this grows, you can see, then we would do that. See how that's working?
Okay.
Just see, look at it, it's down this way. And then the next year, as these things started to do as that turned into that, we would again clip here and do a thinning cut on top there, right? Get rid of that one up there. Because now what? Now I've got this whole arc going down. Everybody can see that. It's so easy. You can make dinosaurs and everything.
I hate to ask this question, but how do you prune lavender?
Ah, there we go. I hate to ask that question, because then you're going to do it. So lavender is difficult, but it's difficult. Oh, it's not difficult. It requires an eye. Okay. Let's see if I can. So lavender, like all plants, there's a different coloration between fresh lateral, aged lateral, and then secondary growth. You can see it a little bit here. But if you look at your lavender, when you go to prune it, the tip will be of one greenish yellow color. Then there'll be a point down here where it's going to be brown. Then there's going to be a point in the middle where it's not the green yellow, it's not the brown, it's kind of a yellowy tan, whatever. That is where I'm going to cut it. If I cut it too high, what happens is I get that break there, that, that's because it's heading cuts, it's all heading cuts, cling. If I cut it too high up, that's on wood that hasn't been well established, and many plants we get that. There'll be a drooping effect, right? Hydrangeas are a common thing where people don't cut them down low enough, they get that thing. If I cut lavender too tall up, the breaks occur on weaker growth that hasn't been wooded off, and the plant has a tendency to do that. Okay, they're weaker, and they're weaker structure, there's more of them, and it makes what we call slightly downward facing. If I prune too deep, they break off very poorly, and lots of times, back to the example of, 5 years later, still nothing, there's just no growth here. What happens, a lot of times a cut like that will stimulate something way down at the bottom, at ground level. If I get that middle point, not the lush green stuff, not the brown stuff, somewhere in the middle. You look at your lavender, you'll see the two distinct colors. Find that 50% middle point of color, not of distance, because it matters on the plant. I'm looking for the color. I'm trying to get into just where the wood has started to actually wooden up, going from herbaceous to woody, and I clip it there. Now what happens, it will still break there, but they'll be more erect, and I'll get a really nice upward facing as opposed to a downward facing.
When?
See, there we go.
When do you do it?
When do you do it? Now, here's the last thing too. So, first of all, if you're taking notes, because good question, this one's a setup, you want to write down F-R-A-U-D. I'm a fraud. I'm a fraud. I don't have my degree in horticulture. I'm not even a master gardener, okay? Actually, I went to school for international relations. I was going to be a lawyer, then I got bad.
You got singing.
Yes, I did. I realized people like flowers and they make no bad jokes about flower people. But now with that said, the reason I mention that is, and I always tell people, if you don't like what I say in my classes and my articles, you don't have to listen to me because I'm a fraud. I have no certification whatsoever. However, I talk about the weather here, and the weather here is different, and all the time I get, especially from master gardeners, don't want to pick on any if you're here, master gardeners love to come into my face with textbooks on stuff. I'm talking about here, the weather here is unique. Remember one of the 5 places where you can cut delphinium down? Look at the weather we've had now. So I have found here, and I want to continue because I did take law, prior knowledge, full disclosure. I prune against what the books say. I wait and go into just when I see the last pigmentation of flower. And that, for us, we let it really hang in, because that pigmentation will hang. I keep a logbook. I think this year it was September 10th we did it. I have one place, I have several. I have one place we have 164 lavender plants. Not in rows, used in design. They're all mass planted in different varieties and 2 dry creeks to roll over the hills, right? Not in rows, mass planting. I then prune that, and I take that, because that gives me 2 things. Not only does that deadhead my flower, which I wanted to do, but I've learned if I do it that late in September, and usually a prune like that has about a 2-week stall, and there's a shock to the plant. By that time, I'm into October, the weather has changed, the light, more importantly, has changed. Lavender is a Mediterranean plant. Again, plants are pretty stupid. They're easy to manipulate. They work on 2 things, day length and soil temperature. And both my day length, especially because we're way northern too, right? My day length especially is way down at that time of year compared to where they've evolved in, right? And my weather has drastically changed, and I found out for me that that is way better than doing the traditional spring type of cuttings before they go. And we combine, but if you don't do that, you should deadhead, which is, but making sure you come up over that foliage, not pinching it. But this way we found the ability to combine 2 jobs into one. Because by the way, I'm inherently lazy. I'm always trying to find the easy way out. So it really, and for my client too, or for just you, in this particular place, this year it took us 28 hours to prune all the lavender. It's other things, it's the dry creek and plants around it. But, if I just deadheaded, that would take me another 20 hours and to come back. So, it's also cost effective, but I learned that the hard way by kind of following recommendations my first and second year out here and realizing, when I moved out here because the weather was, see, take my class. Watch, we'll try this again, class. The weather here is perfect. It is, because remember, who's here from Texas and California or something? Anybody in the South? Where you think it's never warm, right? It's never warm. It's not about you. It's never cold either. It's about the plants. But it's just not, what we think, the weather here is perfect. Let me come back another time, and then I'll close it up because I know you got things to do. Generally I start off, we have so much to do in pruning. I always like to start off, not always, class or the first time, where I talk about the weather a little, just how amazing we are, how perfect it is here, how it's never hot, never cold, how we have deficit night temperatures, all that kind of thing. The weather here is such that we really have to pay attention to a lot of things. I'll never forget one of my first years here, they had Martha Stewart doing the column in the paper when I started writing. By the way, John Brewer at the time in New York, he edited Martha Stewart's column. I remember, so that's my first year, and I'm getting excited. Started in July, and all of a sudden I come out in September, and at the last day in September, and I write, the headline of my article says, "Time to buy your bulbs, but do not plant." And I go on to buy, and I give you all the reasons why you're not supposed to plant now, forget what, how mild our weather is. Martha Stewart's headline that day in the paper, "Now's the time to plant your bulbs." But on that one, just so you know, and then again, right off pruning, I don't plant my bulbs here till usually the middle of November, if not the first days in December. Because the way our weather is, if I plant those bulbs earlier than that, in September, like the books say in October, my goodness, not even on this year, any year they're already up and going. So just for many things, when I advise, I am advising truly on this unique weather, and by the way, let's end it on this. There's only 5 places in the world that are both a UN biosphere and a World Heritage Site, and we're one of them. And it's just because of how unique our weather here. It's why I really believe if you're not gardening, sell your house, you're taking up valuable real estate. Thank you very much.